Good afternoon, everyone. It is interesting to say that at 6 a.m. for me, but good afternoon for everyone. Or good evening, morning, from whenever wherever you're joining from. It is a very great honor to be here chairing this panel on such an interesting topic that is disputes on land and water. And since we are already a bit delayed, I will not take up much of the time. So without further ado, I give the word to the Seoul-based team of Dr. Nguyen, Toan, Thang, and Yeung from Hanoi Law University. And on the very interesting topic that is IUU fishing, challenges and its implications for the cooperation between countries in the ASEAN. Thank you.
Hi everyone, can you hear me? So we have four authors, me and Nguyen. So we would like to discuss about some legal and practical issues related to prevent and combat IUU fishing, and especially in the ASEAN region. So the following presentation, next slide please, will focus on 3 points. Next slide. Okay.
That's because I can.
Yeah, because
Okay.
Some delay.
First of all, we have some review about the international legal framework on IUU fishing, and next we try to have some analysis about the legal framework and export of the ASEAN country, and finally we talk about some implications for promoting cooperation between countries in ASEAN, especially for promoting the IUU fishing. As for the international framework, as we next slide please, as we all know that illegal, unreported and unregulated fishing, IUU fishing is not a new problem arising in exploitation and use on the road and the sea by the country abroad. IUU fishing, but IUU fishing have negative impacts to the interests of the coastal state and other states, and even to the whole international community. And IUU fishing is also a serious threat to the sustainability of fishery resources and the marine environment. According to European Union, so the EU estimated that the global value of IUU fishing to be around 11 to 22 billion per year, and the ASEAN country experience also over 6 billion in economic loss in 2019, and which with Indonesia and Vietnam so we experience the largest. That's why to limit and eventually eliminate IUU fishing, the country and international organizations have taken active actions to establish a global legal framework for combating IUU activity. And next, so according to the international program of action to prevent, deter, and eliminate illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, IPOA. IUU fishing is divided in general into 3 categories. We have illegal fishing, we have unreported fishing, and we have also unregulated fishing. I think for the concept, what is the meaning of IUU fishing? We have the explanation of FAO. According to that, IUU fishing means the fishing activity by vessels, including foreign vessels and the vessels from coastal states, without permission, or with permission but in violation of fishing regulation, to provide with returns like fishing that comply with sustainable fishing regulation. I think the meaning of fishing is well explained by the FAO publication in 2001 as shared in the slide. So we don't need to have more discussion about the meaning of fishing. And in practice over the last years, a range of hard and soft law instruments has been developed and implemented to address the problems associated with the IUU fishing. Hard law refer in fact to the legally binding treaty, maybe at the local, maybe at the regional level, or maybe bilateral level. For example, especially here we have United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, we have also UN Fish Stop Agreement, and we have also the Trout Compliance Agreement. And we have also other soft law, not legally binding by the state, but state compliant. They wanted to comply with its items. So, according to rules, the coastal state has the right to establish different maritime zones, from internal water, territorial sea to especially economic exclusive zone, and the coastal state has the sovereign right to explore for the exploration for the use of the natural resource, including the fishing. And for other maritime zones, especially for the high sea, every state has equal right to exploit the fishing. That's why, according to Article 87 and 116 of the rules, the rules emphasize that states must cooperate in the conservation and management of fishing of the living resources in the high sea. And where necessary and appropriate, states shall establish a regional or sub-regional fishery organization to implement the above measures. And from this legal basis, at the regional level, we have also the different cooperation mechanisms to prevent, to punish, and eventually to eliminate IUU activity. Within the framework of this agreement, we have regional fishery body, including regional fishery management organization. And this regional fishery organization are in quite important organizations to promote long-term sustainable fishery and why international cooperation in conservation and management is required. When we mention the rules, I think there is one article we need to mention also. The Article 73 related to also to the right of coastal state and the right of other states. Yes. Now, why I mentioned this article? Because according to Article 73, the coastal state has the right exclusive to exploit the living resource in the EEZ. But for in the face of the increasing occurrence of IUU activity, so some countries try to criminalize the IUU activity and consider as a form of transnational organized crime. So say that should be included in the United Nations Convention against transnational organized crime. And that's why, and for the country in ASEAN, we can have one example that is Indonesia. And if we look at the reasons in growth and in top, so maybe we can have some comment. Because some scholars they also argue that if we accepted IUU fishing as a form of transnational crime, so the exercise of jurisdiction of the coastal state in the effect over IUU will be shared with other member states of UNTOP. And it is unlikely to be accepted by the general coastal state, as it directly related to the sovereign right and jurisdiction of the coastal state in the economic zone. And besides, the application of criminal matter will be limited and difficult to enforce because Article 73, especially paragraph 3, provided that coastal state penalty for violating fishery laws and regulations in the event may not include imprisonment in the absence of agreement of the state and so on. And that's why if we criminalize the IUU activity, so that will be some conflict between why outlining Article 73 of the law with the provisions of the UNTOP. And that's why I'd like to raise this question, because this question is now actually is an own discussion between scholars. And we have different point of view related to this question. Okay, and for the ASEAN country, yes, ASEAN country experience also huge economic growth for the IUU fishing activity. For example, Indonesia has the largest economic growth in ASEAN, and followed by Vietnam. Also, we report about 1.6 billion growth per year. And up to now, ASEAN countries have not signed legally binding regional document on IUU fishing. Current instruments are only recommendations for member states. For example, in 2007, we have some document. For example, the original action plan on strengthening responsible fishing practice. And after that, we have also other documents as shared on the slide, especially in 2015, we have declaration ASEAN Fish Lake announcing the regional cooperation in preventing IUU fishing and enhancing the competitive ASEAN fishing. And of course, we can also mention the ASEAN regional forum. Okay, I think ASEAN is quite crucial in developing policy laws on IUU fishing, and for the prevention and for the prevention and control in the region, because in terms of nature, current regional documents on IUU fishing, in fact they are not legally binding, reaching the ASEAN states. ASEAN countries are also the member of the group, except Cambodia. And the ASEAN country participated also in many international instruments related to managing and exploiting marine fish resources. However, I think the international management mechanism is not enough for the preventing of IUU fishing, especially in the ASEAN region. We mentioned the name in South China Sea, and I would like to have some word about this name because we have different names. We have South China Sea for internationally recognized recognition, but from Vietnam we have other word we call the ITSI. And for other countries of ASEAN, for example, for Philippines, they call the Western Philippines Sea. And that's why I would like to use not the South China Sea, but I would like to use the ITSI. Okay, from the point of view of Vietnam, because I'm Vietnamese. It's not a question of the sovereignty. It's only about the we have attitude, we have attitude to pull something. Okay. And I think we both only create only a common legal framework for country to continue and to provide IU activity. On the side of some country, they sign some bilateral agreement. For example, between Vietnam and China, we have a bilateral agreement to the common fishing in the but this agreement stopped working in 2020. Yes, and at regional level, so ASEAN has taken many initiatives to promote collaboration against IUU fishing, and at the same time. Towards sustainable, modern, responsible, and effective regional fishing development. However, cooperation model focus more on technical support and information exchange with the main role of consulting and making recommendations. We have some regional fishery management organizations.
I'm really sorry to interrupt, but you have 2 minutes left.
Okay, so I just read it. Okay. And when we talk about the question of challenges of our fishing, I think we need to put in the context of the dispute, because in the East Sea we have a different dispute, the maritime dispute between the country. We have the dispute which concerns sovereignty. We have also for the maritime delimitation and other which relate to the law and technique. And according to the South China Sea Arbitration Award in 2016, so we the tribunal reject the claim of nationality of the China, and the tribunal also concluded that every high tide elevations in the Swahili Island are not island. They are only have the having status of rock or low tide elevation. And why I mentioned this tribunal award, because we can determine the maritime area around the different maritime feature in the South China Sea, in the East Sea. And that's why we can talk also about how the ASEAN country can manage, can cooperate in the East Sea. And for some consideration, I think we can have two kinds of measures for consideration. The first one, I think is also priority in the coming time, is to improve the quality of fishing port on the resource. We need import from each ASEAN country, as I share on the slide. And the second one, I think we need the regional cooperation. And I think if in the future, if possible, ASEAN should consider about the possibility to establish the regional fishery organization. and not only between ASEAN country, but between the country in the region, between the country in the bordering the East. So I think this measure, well, as they may promote, and I think it will be a long-term goal to conserve and sustain and to manage the prison thought in the East. So thank you for your attention. I finished my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this presentation, such a current and relevant topic for both the economic and the environmental aspects of it. So following on, we have on the Zoom call Mohit Vashisth and Nikita Vats. And so Mohit Vashisth and Nikita Vats are both from OP Jindal Global University in India, and they will be talking about unsettled border, unresolved territorial claims, and growing insurgency, analyzing the Afghanistan-Pakistan territorial conflict. So without further ado, I will give the floor to the presenters. Thank you.
Good afternoon from India to everyone. I'm glad that I'm provided with the opportunity to speak at this panel discussion organized by NKR and JTMS. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. My colleague, Ms. Nikita Vats, was not able to make it to the event because of some personal emergency. So I shall be presenting my slides on a research project named Unsettled Border, Unresolved Territorial Claims and Growing Insurgency, analyzing the Afghanistan-Pakistan territorial conflict. So South Asia, a post-colonial and post-partition region, has been caught up into the geopolitical triad of bordering, ordering, and othering. So especially the South Asia, which is a subcontinent that clearly qualifies as ecologically and geographically connected, but is still geopolitically divided. It feeds into and are in turn fed by boundary producing formal and popular narratives which continue to take place and have not yet been theorized. Some of the disputed boundaries, especially in the South Asia, McMahon line that is between India and China, a red cliff line between India and Pakistan, and the Durand line between Pakistan and Afghanistan. The Durand line forms the Afghanistan-Pakistan border, which is a 2640 kilometer international land border between Afghanistan and Pakistan in South Asia. The western end runs to the border with Iran and the eastern end to the border with China. The border is south of the Hindu Kush, while its eastern end went to China and is in the Karakoram range. So the Durand line was established in 1893 under an agreement reached between King Abdur Rahman, who was the then Emir of Afghanistan, and from the British side, it was Sir Mortimer Durand, who negotiated the very salience of this line, which would demarcate the limits of his and British India's sphere of influence on the Afghan frontier with India. The origins of the Durand line, named after Sir Mortimer Durand, can be traced back to the great game of colonial competition between the Great Britain and Tsarist Russia in the 19th century. With the independence from the British rule in 1947, Pakistan inherited the Durand line, and with it also the Pashtun rejection of the line and Afghanistan's refusal to recognize it. In fact, Afghanistan was the only country to vote against Pakistan joining the United Nations in 1947. In Pakistan, Punjabis and Pashtuns make up the two major ethnic groups along the Durand Line. Pashtuns are the largest ethnic group in Afghanistan and the largest ethnic minority in Pakistan, which is home to almost 30 million Pashtuns. The Durand Line divided the Hindu Kush into Afghan and British spheres of influence, and in the process, dividing the homeland of different Pashtun tribes. The negotiations surrounding the Durand Line ultimately raised ethical and practical concerns. The border was drawn without input from the communities inhabiting these areas, and the arbitrary division of the tribal communities from the start, which socially delegitimized the Durand Line as a political boundary. The mapping process, moreover, created significant ambiguity as to where precisely the border lied. This ambiguity must be seen in the context of region's geography, as topological factors were not considered. The Durand Line cut across mountains that regular border units would not be capable of controlling due to the climate and the general natural environment of the area. So in this sense, the Durand Line was also politically arbitrary, as neither the Afghans nor the Raj could practically enforce the Durand Line as a political border between Afghanistan and India. The subsequent porosity thus further delegitimized the Durand Line and the community most affected by the line, that is the Pashtun population. Now, the refusal to accept the legality of the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan is not unique to the Afghan Taliban or the previous governments. Afghan governments following the creation of Pakistan in 1947 have argued that the legitimacy of the line expired in 1993 as the validity of the validity of the agreement was for 100 years. Crucially, the Taliban also did not recognize the Durand Line, neither during their first reign between 1996 to 2001, nor now. Meanwhile, Pakistan argues that the Durand Line is a legal international border between the two states and has built a fence along the border. In late December of 2021, Taliban forces began taking down the fences that the Pakistan army had erected along the Durand Line, threatening the army forces with violence if the fencing operation continued. Taliban, which is predominantly Pashtun, argued that the Durand Line disrupts the Pashtun community's trade and free movement, leaving them divided between the two countries. The region is also home to Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, and for that we are going to use the acronym TTP, which is often considered the deadliest terrorist group in Pakistan, which has killed more than 1,800 Pakistanis since 2007. Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan is associated with the Taliban, and many TTP leaders have sought refuge in Afghanistan. After coming into power, the Taliban brokered a short-lived ceasefire between TTP and the Pakistan government and mediated peace talks between them. The cross-border tensions peaked in 2017 with several attacks on the Pakistan's border post by the militants. Pakistan claims that the militants were given shelter in Afghanistan. Pakistan presumably believed that a Taliban-led government in Kabul would recognize the Durand Line's legitimacy and that Islamabad could use the TTP's ties to the Taliban to mediate a peace deal with them. Pakistan was mistaken on both counts, though. The Taliban has assaulted Pakistanis working to erect the fences because they do not recognize the Durand Line's legitimacy. Although the Taliban's position enjoys local support, it is unlikely to be a viable one, given that Afghanistan depends on Pakistan for military, humanitarian, and political assistance in their struggle for international legitimacy. So the current situation with regards to Durand line is that both Taliban and TTP are Pashtun dominated groups, and there has been an increase in the cross-border firings from both the sides. There is also a chance that in order to seek the support of local Pashtun population and to establish the domestic authority, Taliban would increase the cross-border scuffles from the Afghan side of the Durand line. There have been indications that Taliban and TTP are working more closely than before. There is a possibility of an increase in the TTP-sponsored attacks inside Pakistan. And one of the most recent events which I want to mention here is the departure of former, Prime Minister of Pakistan. While the new government in Islamabad under Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif will firstly address the national economic crisis and attempt to establish a stable government, it will likely change its approach to dealing with both the Talibans, that is the Afghan Taliban and the TTP. The stability of the region is significantly impacted by the border between the two nations. The recent airstrikes, deaths of the civilians will almost probably lead to higher tensions between Kabul and Islamabad and greater violence along the border. The recent visit by a delegation from the Indian Foreign Ministry is likely to increase Taliban's mistrust of Islamabad, which is already at odds with New Delhi. In order to increase its domestic support, the Taliban is unlikely to budge from its stance on the Durand line and will keep blocking the construction of the fences and sheltering the TTP members. The TTP and Islamabad are unlikely to reach a sustainable ceasefire, and a peace agreement is only a remote possibility. So the Durand line should be acknowledged by Afghans as the international border between their country and Pakistan. By doing this, the long-running border dispute with Pakistan would be resolved, paving the way for genuine cooperation in the peace process in Afghanistan. For this, both the countries will have to make some tough choices. The mechanism that would improve cooperation between the two neighbors can be worked out by Afghanistan and Pakistan. Global and the regional powers can also assist and expedite the process, however. Better trade, investment, and cooperation between Pashtun people would result from this as well. For improved inter-ethnic relations, the two countries can also negotiate the terms and conditions of flexible cross-border movement among Pashtun territories. That's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vashisth, for the very interesting presentation. So it seems like we do not have Mr. Bashir al-Abbas with us, but either on Zoom or in Seoul. So as a consequence, I will take the time for my presentation so that we don't take up valuable panel time. And after I'm done, I will open the floor to the Q&A session. So without further ado, I'll also time myself to be very fair to everyone. So hello everyone. First of all, it's a pleasure to be here again to talk about such dear topic to me, because this was actually my undergraduate thesis topic a couple of years back. I'm Julia Weston and I'm a PhD candidate at the Catholic University of Portugal. And two small disclaimers before I start. The first one is I had a panel earlier today, and this is my second panel, and I must have slept for around 2 hours. So if I make any weird mistakes, it's because of sleep deprivation. Second of all, I know this is a very delicate and complex topic, and I'm trying to be as objective as I can. But I know that there are people watching that are from the disputed region. So if you have any clarifications or any questions, please provide those at the Q&A. It will be very interesting. I'm only basing myself on the materials that I had access to in the English language. So whatever happens, please comment it. I'll be very glad to share perspectives on the issue. So today I'm going to talk a bit about the South China Sea and try to analyze it under the UNCLOS. So the small presentation outline is that I'll talk a bit about the region and its relevance, each of the claimants' claims, and some concluding remarks. It is an important addendum to make that this is not a presentation on the sovereignty issue, because as emphasized by the tribunal on the South China Sea, this is not something that the UNCLOS can deal with in terms of land sovereignty. It only deals with sovereignty over the sea. So I'll try to focus on that as well. So a little reminder of the maritime zones under the UNCLOS regime. So from the baselines to the landward portion of countries, we do have the regime of internal waters of total sovereignty. From 12 nautical miles from the baselines, we have the territorial sea, where we have a mix of sovereignty and innocent passage. 12 nautical miles a bit ahead, we have the contiguous zone, which is merely a jurisdictional zone for prosecuting offenses. From the territorial sea up to 118 miles, not 188 nautical miles forward, we have the exclusive economic zone, where we have the jurisdiction over the sovereign rights over living resources for their conservation, management, and exploitation over the water column and the surface. And in the same amount and variable due to extension possibilities, we have the continental shelf that covers the seabed and subsoil, exactly for sovereign rights for exploitation and conservation. So I think that talking about this topic in Asia means that I do not have to be very, very comprehensive in this part about the relevance of the South China Sea. I'm quite sure we're all aware of the relevance of this very important region of the globe. It is a major trade route. It comprises many straits and choke points for international trade. Therefore, any potential disputes can bring a great deal of global instability. The reason why I chose the UNCLOS to analyze this under is because the UNCLOS has as its goals that of promoting the strengthening of peace and friendly relations, and the maritime zones in the UNCLOS are a way of providing more certainty and security when we're dealing with the ocean in general. So going a bit through the claims, this is a short presentation, so I can't dwell on them there that much. But concerning China's claims, I'm quite sure everyone has probably seen it in the news at some point. We do have the 9-dash line that crosses throughout the South China Sea. And this is, according to China itself, based on historic evidence, based on maps that China submits, and also on the presence of Chinese fisherfolk within the region from the earlier centuries. So the basis provided for the 9-dash line are historic rights, or historic and legal basis, according to notes verbal issued by China itself at the UN in various moments. However, the content of these historic rights, or the content of this legal basis, has not specifically been clarified by China up to date. Within the South China Sea Tribunal between the Republic of the Philippines and the Republic of China, the arbitral tribunal said that historic rights to the resources within the 9-dash line would be inconsistent with the UNCLOS, because once China signed the UNCLOS, it would be subject to the EZ regime and all that entails. So in my view, if we follow the UNCLOS very closely, for the sake of stability, it would be safer to continue presuming that regular UNCLOS maritime zones are applicable until issues are further clarified and negotiated. With Taiwan, we have a similar claim, pretty much the same, with the added factor that we have a very, very complex issue on whether Taiwan is a state or not. Many countries do not recognize it as such, while a few others do. Since the claim is the same, we have a similar basis as well in terms of historic rights. Yet we also do not have any clarifications. Only a somewhat focus from the new administration, the latest administrations of Taiwan, to distance itself from historic rights into a closer approach to the UNCLOS. Yet without the specific clarification of how this would fit into the UNCLOS, the response that I would give would be fairly much the same one I give to the Chinese one. It is important that we focus on the UNCLOS allocated maritime zones while we do not have any clarifications. In terms of Vietnam, we do not have a 9-dash line. We have a claims to features within both the so-called Paracels and Spratly archipelagos within the South China Sea. And this is apparently a mix of historic title and some UNCLOS institutes. We do apparently have a focus on the UNCLOS, yet the baselines for that or the guidance on how that would be applied are not clarified. We did have a joint submission along with Malaysia to the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf for the extension of the continental shelf of both countries into the South China Sea. Yet this is quite unlikely to be analyzed due to the CLCS's practice of not addressing areas when they are in conflict as to their sovereignty. So it is unlikely that this would be granted. So while we do not have the clarifications on the baselines, my recommendation would be exactly the same as the above. And an important addendum to make would be that even if we do have an extension of the continental shelf, this would only give sovereign rights to the seabed and subsoil. As for the Philippines, we do have some disagreements amongst commentators regarding the basis for the Philippine claims, either on historic basis or on territorial acquisition principles and some UNCLOS dispositions. So we have claims over diverse features in the Spratly Islands and around. The South China Sea Tribunal itself has determined that some of the disputed features would be within the Philippine EEZ and therefore subject to the regime of the EEZ in terms of sovereign rights for the conservation and management and exploitation of living resources. However, it is important to recall that the EEZ regime itself only allows for sovereign rights of resources for conservation and exploitation and not for sovereignty. And also, we do have to regard obligations as both between the coastal state and other states, and the other states when using the EEZ and passing by the EEZ. Yet the meaning of due regard in the international law of the sea has not been clarified, which also does not give that much juridical security to it. As for Malaysia, we have claims over 14 features within the so-called Spratlys. And we do have apparently the basis for these claims on the features within both the EEZ and the continental shelf regimes. However, in this, I would like also to point out the functionality of both the maritime zones that, as I mentioned earlier, these are sovereign rights zones, and this is not, they're not sovereignty zones. So we would have sovereign rights over the natural resources contained therein, but not specific sovereignty until that is declared as such. And as such, these both the considerations for the continental shelf and the EEZ apply, including due regard. While we don't have a meaning of due regard, it is very difficult to tell what due regard itself would entail. As for Brunei's claim, I was only able to find a claim over one feature, which is the Luisa Reef, which is a submerged feature. And it is comprised by both technically the EEZ and the part of the continental shelf of Brunei. Since this is a submerged feature, it is debated amongst commentators whether this would be a part of the Bruneian continental shelf, because it would not be a projection of the claim upward, it would be a submerged feature. So this seems to draw a bit closer to the UNCLOS in terms of of sovereignty, yet we do not have sovereignty over these EEZ and continental shelf areas. We have sovereign rights, so it's all quite balanced and limited as far how far it could go. So some concluding remarks. As far as I could find, the Chinese, Taiwanese, and Vietnamese claims are still rather unclear because they do not have that many clarifications as to their legal basis or historic basis. Yet the Philippine, the Malaysian, and the Bruneian claims try to use more UNCLOS institutes and draw closer to the international law of the sea as we know it. However, in these attempts, it is very important to highlight that both the EEZ and the continental shelf only give entitlement to sovereign rights over resources for the purposes of exploitation, exploration, conservation, and management, and not sovereignty per se. So this is not an issue that the law of the sea can help clarify. However, because the guiding principle behind it is that the land dominates the sea, and until we don't know who owns the land and what kind of land it is very hard to tell what that sovereignty would entail. However, the UNCLOS can give us a few directives as to the minimum maritime zones that each of the states can claim, and they all have claimed, as far as I know, they all have claimed EEZs and continental shelves throughout, and the UNCLOS itself gives very interesting ways of maritime boundary delimitation, and in both the EEZ and the continental shelf regime parts of the UNCLOS, it is highlighted that parties to maritime boundary disputes should make efforts for joint developments and not jeopardizing final agreements. I know that the issue is far deeper than that, and in order to achieve joint developments and not jeopardizing final agreements, it is often hard when it comes to sovereignty disputes. But I know that there have been a few cases of joint developments, and there has been some negotiation at Asian-based forums, and even a code of conduct proclaimed for the region. So that there have been efforts in this sense, and always keeping in mind that international law and the law of the sea seek to provide some sort of stability. And in my view, this is always the best way to go. It's following the rule of law and trying to reach a fair and equitable and just solution for the international world order. So thank you very much. I'm done with my presentation. And since we do not have the last panelists, I would like to open the session to the Q&A by the panelists, by the discussants, if that's possible.
As I review your paper, and I think that you can provide an overall review about different parties' position regarding South China Sea dispute. It helps review, tell us why it is important. Why this issue is important, but there are some suggestions about your paper and suggestions for your future research. First of all, in the PPT, you provide some review about the international law, about EEZ, different regions, and I think, but in your paper, you didn't mention that, and then I have some definition about rock, island, and so on. I think your research should mention that. I mean, in the literature review, you should mention that. And second one is about you missing some important countries, just like United States, one is in Singapore. You didn't mention that. It's already important too. But in the future, I will recommend that you can choose one of the countries to specify or discuss deeply about what is position about the opinion or position regarding South China Sea dispute and how they mediate and interact with each other. It is important. And then I'm going to talk about the territorial dispute between Afghanistan and Pakistan. Your research is quite detailed, and you talk about historical development, and then encourage development and in this hot spot in this region. So there's one question there. So how to mediate this conflict, or what is the role of the UN play in this conflict? And then the final paper refers that it's the first paper you present about the IU issue. Yes, in your paper you talk a lot about this very detail, and then it gives us about those content of those legal documents. But I would like to ask whether there is some cases about some specific cases about this IU fishing, and then there are some case about violation and how to enforce it. And
So I have questions for each of the presenters, and my colleague has brought up some very good points on the papers. I'd rather focus on some of the questions for the excellent papers that you presented today. So I'm going to start with the first paper on IUU. It's an extremely important topic, and I find myself sort of looking at one particular question in particular. Now, you had mentioned that international mechanisms for dealing with illegal fishing in IUU are not really enough. And in your paper, you mentioned that regional fisheries management organizations can be quite costly and tough to build in a particular region. So I was thinking to myself, one of the things is that fishing communities, especially in Europe and the United States and other parts of the world, are a very important, typically very important domestic political law. And they have a lot of influence and put a lot of pressure on the government to meet their own needs. And I was wondering two things. Are the losses from IUU, which you would put up, each ASEAN state has lost a lot, particularly Indonesia, has lost a lot of revenue to illegal fishing. One, are these losses intra-ASEAN? That is, are the ASEAN states illegally fishing each other's zones and stealing their fish? And how much of this might be China or outside countries coming into the EC and into that area to illegally fish? So my first is this sort of an intra-ASEAN problem we can deal with, or is it more of an international problem? And the second part was, do ASEAN states deal with the same types of political pressure from fishing communities? That is, do the governments have an interest in stopping IUU if their fishermen are illegally fishing and therefore supplementing their own incomes? Because this might lead to political strife, even in less democratic states that need to deal with local communities and make sure everybody is developing properly. Do those questions make sense? Okay, good. The second one for our second presentation on Pakistan and Afghanistan. Really happy that presentation was brought up. I do teach a class on South Asia, so this was interesting in that regard, and I can talk about it with my class next week. It did bring up one significant question as I sort of viewed the map, and that is post 1947, Pakistan has often dealt with regional autonomy issues. Different groups within Pakistan are looking for regional autonomy, and Afghanistan has really dealt with the same type of issues with a weak central government. And so I was looking at that map, and I was thinking to myself, you mentioned that sort of a state-to-state solution, Afghanistan and Pakistan working together, maybe Afghanistan recognizing the line as the border and then working out some flexible management arrangements. But I'm wondering, how do the Pashtun people in those communities feel? And do they want the line recognized, or would they rather create sort of a much larger autonomous Pashtun region that would take away territory from both Pakistan and Afghanistan and create sort of an autonomous entity in between the two states? So I was interested in sort of the local community take on that, if you can speak to that. And my final one is for Julie with the presentation on South China Sea. The question that keeps coming up, you earlier today in your first presentation mentioned how you have positive viewpoints on UNCLOS and think it's a very important mechanism within the international system. And I was wondering, with China ignoring tribunal rulings as they did in 2016, and as they sort of continue to ignore UNCLOS as a mechanism that should be respected, do you believe that UNCLOS will lose influence in the South China Sea region amongst other claimants as it fails to really adequately deal with the different and varying claims that are contested? Because as the US is not a member of UNCLOS and China is ignoring it, as the great powers play in the region as well, I wonder if UNCLOS is losing some of its relevance in the region. So those are my questions, and I hope they're understandable. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I think we can do the question answering in the same order that we did the presentations. So if the first panelist can start answering the questions, that would be lovely.
Okay, firstly, I have some, I would like to raise a point for discussion and to answer from the question from the discussion. And personally, I have also some questions, especially about the South China Sea. And I think if we have time, we can have some more discussion here. Is it possible?
We may be pushing close to time for further discussion. However, I think that if we answer questions first, then we can come back to discussion. That will probably be
so for the first question about if we have some precedents about IU fishing, in general, yes, we have some place before, especially before the international tribunal for the long sea. Yes. But if we ask, do we have some cases between the ASEAN country? As I know, we don't have yet between the ASEAN country, because when we have some problems, for example, between Vietnam, Malaysia, Vietnam, Indonesia, about the catch of IU fishing, so the country try to negotiate. They don't bring the case before the court. So if we talk about the decision from the tribunal or international court about the dispute, IU fishing dispute between ASEAN country and as I know, we don't have yet. But ASEAN country try many times and negotiate to resolve different issues about IU fishing. Because, for example, when fisher from Vietnam or fisher from other country, they go to the high sea, or especially they go to the exclusive economic zone of other country. And that's why sometimes we have to negotiate. And because in the EC we have many overlapping maritime zone, and sometimes the fisher from ASEAN countries they know that. For example, between Vietnam and Indonesia, we have the maritime overlapping zone, and fisher from Vietnam, from Indo, they go there, and some coastal from Vietnam, from Indo, we have to negotiate. So we have practice about how to prevent IU fishing. And about the second question is that I would like to start off about the intention of the ASEAN country. They really want to stop IU fishing. I think yes. ASEAN countries, they really want to stop IU fishing. But in practice, it's not in. We have many reasons. For example, one of them because of the question of economic. Most of ASEAN countries are developing countries. And for example, Vietnam, we are a developing country, and we have many fishers. As they need to go to the sea and to catch the fish. And even the government really tried to make many regulations to prevent even if we have the penalty for the fisher. If they do not respect the law, the Vietnamese law, and the food laws, the food laws. But even we try from time to time, and we continue to do different methods. But there are still some Vietnamese fisher. They commit the act of fishing. But ASEAN countries, they try to cooperate. But the problem between the countries, ASEAN countries, is that we don't have the one legally binding instrument. We work on the principle consensus principle. And we have many recommendations, we have many activities, many measures for about the technical, about the information, the sharing information. But we don't have yet one legally binding instrument for the how to stop fishing. And that's why I think the ASEAN country need to go together further and try to negotiate to have regional fishery organization. And for your question about only ASEAN country permit fishing or not, or other country. My answer is not only ASEAN country, other country, for example, China. They permit also many activities on fishing. And I have some question about the South China Sea and even about the border dispute between Afghanistan and Pakistan. If we have more time, thank you.
So I guess we're back. So please, Mr. Vashisth, you can deal with the questions that were posed to you right now.
Yeah. First of all, I want to thank you, sir, for the insights on the topic and the question. So I agree that the Pashtun population wants a separate homeland for them, which they call Pashtunistan, and the struggle for that already started before the formation of Pakistan out of India, that is in 1947. But I believe that Taliban has quite a sway over Pashtun population, and there is in Hindi we call it roti or a beti ka rishta. It means that both the tribes of Pashtuns, which are located on either side of Grand line, has a relation of food and marriages. So they want a different land for themselves, but if Taliban gains popular support of Pashtun population, and both the sides, that is Afghanistan and Pakistan, show some welcoming gestures, so in the long run this conflict can be tackled and a peaceful solution can be found out in a efficient manner. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Concerning the second question, thanks a lot for that. Interestingly enough, for me, it is the opposite. I don't think the UNCLOS loses relevance at all, because, okay, we do have major players, but one doesn't abide to it and one isn't a party to it. Okay, but interestingly enough, the US, although it is not a party to the UNCLOS, mentions it a lot, especially when it comes to freedom of navigation within the region and when it comes to peace and stability. So even though it's not a party to it, it somewhat uses it selectively. So in my view, the document does not lose relevance at all in the region or in the world as a whole. And also, since we have a great power imbalance within the region between the involved claimants, the UNCLOS is also, in a way, seen as a means for justifying claims within international law and making them stronger against more powerful more politically powerful neighbors. So in my view, the UNCLOS is yet even more relevant in some cases, especially when we have disputes and issues with peace and stability. Thank you.
Is it okay if I add a question? I mean, I'm not a discussant, but
Yeah,
like one question.
I believe our host is nodding her head. Yes, we have actually.
Yeah, definitely. Like if we have time.
Well, actually, my question actually to anyone maybe who's familiar with South China Sea. I'm wondering if the claimant countries expect any roles taken by South Korea. Because I mean, we're here in South Korea, and South Korea is very involved with the US as an ally, and US has been promoting it to get more engaged and to, you know, have some kind of force towards that. But South Korea has been very they reserved in the position, except the current new administration is more willing and wanted to join the Quad as well. So I'm wondering, is there expectation from anyone who studied South China Sea in detail, and maybe from Vietnam's position, is there an expectation for these countries, for US allies like South Korea, Japan, to play more significant roles? And if so, from what, why do they expect South Korea to play a role like that? Yeah.
I think South China Sea is not a reason for the country bordering this area. It's not the reason for China and ASEAN countries, because if we look at we look at only the provisions of UNCLOS and the South China Sea arbitration award, we can see that we have many high sea in the South China Sea, because in the South China Sea we don't have islands. Also high tide elevation according to the port. So we have only rocks, and for rocks we have only territory sea around this maritime feature. That means we have only 12 maximum 12 nautical miles around this maritime feature. Okay, so that means we have many areas belonging to high sea in the South China Sea, and in the high sea, that means every state are equal, and we enjoy the principle of freedom of the sea, including freedom of navigation, freedom of overfly, and that's why other countries, from US, from South Korea, from Japan, and they interest in the South China Sea, because they want to ensure the freedom of the sea in this area. So I think if other country informed for that explain also why US has a full operation to ensure the freedom of the navigation in the world, including in the South China Sea. So we have to look at for the dispute in the South China Sea. We have to look at closely to the dispute. For example, if we said about the sovereignty territorial dispute, okay, we have only the state concern. But if we talk about the principle of the freedom of navigation, it's not only about China, only about the ASEAN country. It concerns other countries like US, Japan, South Korea, and even China and ASEAN country try to negotiate the COC, the Code of Conduct in the South China Sea. It's not only the problem of the China and ASEAN country, because it concerns also the freedom of navigation. And it concerns also the role of other countries in this region. And I think that's why other countries they play a certain role in the South China Sea.
But do you think Vietnam expects South Korea to play a stronger role? Like,
Yes, I think Vietnam is saying that.
okay, wanted to check on that. Thank you.
I have some question for Julia. If you can make more clearly, because in your presentation you said that Vietnam claim on the basis of historic title. So can you make more clearly about this point? Because you mentioned a very large topic, the South China Sea dispute. And we all know that we have many disputes in the South China Sea. I don't know if you mentioned the historic title about this question about the sovereignty dispute, or you mentioned the historic title as special circumstances in the maritime delimitation. So can you make more clearly about this point? And as I know, Vietnam did not claim based on historic title. So can you make more clear about this point? And the second one, in the conclusion, you said also that Taiwan, China, and Vietnam were unclear due to lack of clarification. So concerning the legal basis. So can you make more clear about this point? Because it depends actual dispute. We, for example, about the sovereignty dispute, we make claim on the basis of the one of principle in international law, the effective occupation. And from this principle recognized by many jurisprudence in international tribunal and court. So Vietnam and I think other countries the same. Vietnam prepared many historic evidence, not historic title, historic evidence, and other evidence, maps, administrative decision, etc., to demonstrate that the country has sovereignty from memorial times, and they continue to exercise peacefully over Paracel and Strategy Island. Okay, so I don't understand if we said that the claim unclear. So can you make more clear about this point? I think for Vietnam we have only for the baseline. We declare baseline in 1982, and but only around Steady and Paracel Island because we have the dispute. So we are not decided to define clearly the baseline around Paracel and Steady Island. But recently, in 2020, on 13 March 2020, we sent to the UN diplomatic vote, and we make more clearly the point of view of Vietnam, includes the point of view about the legal status of Paracel and Strategy. It's not archipelago. It's contain many different maritime features. And Vietnam expect also the part will agree with the tribunal, the South China Sea Tribunal Court, on saying that only high tide elevation can be interpreted according to Article 121 paragraph 3. That means to have we separated law and don't have Strategy and Paracel don't have islands. And other maritime feature contains the low tide elevations. So I think if we compose the unclear claim, so I think can be more clearly about what claim, so we can have more precise information about that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for the question and the clarifications, because as I mentioned, I only have access to certain materials because of academic access. So it's very important to hear also inputs from people who are from the region. So thank you very much for that. So my presentation was really an overview. So I did not cover the issues of historic historic occupation, because that's not law of the sea, that's international law and territorial acquisition. So as historic title, I generalized both historic entitlements and historic title. So that's the clarification that I would like to add. I am aware that Vietnam claims the features it claims because of occupation and since an early dynasty. Since I was focusing on the law of the sea aspect, I didn't quite precise on the other international law aspects. So I'm sorry about that confusion, but I do endorse what you said, that that's how the claim is posed. Concerning the 2020 clarification, I was not aware of it, so thank you for bringing it up. It is quite interesting to hear that this has been adjusted according to the decision in the South China Sea and the issue of those features not being rocks and not being islands, but being rocks, and drawing the baselines. So thank you very much for that. I will definitely look out for it when I update the paper. And that's all I can add. Like, I did not have the access to that when I drafted this, but thank you for the clarification. Okay, so I think that was the last question in the Q&A session. So if there are not any requests from the audience, no, since we're quite over time as mentioned, we may conclude this panel. Thank you all for the very interesting discussions that we had and for your great presentations. Thank you.